I know many of you in the audience. I'm Stanley Nelson. I'm at UCLA. I'm a physician. I help run the Certified Duchenne Care Center at UCLA, and I also do research, run the center there. And I have a son who's 16, who's running around in a yellow Permobile here, named Dylan Michelli Nelson. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit, and data obviously makes a profound difference in a lot of our lives, and in Duchenne, and how we should make progress, both in terms of making parental decisions and in terms of how physicians will recommend aspects to us. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about ways that we get data in and how it makes an impact. So as Kathy mentioned, Duchenne changes over time in a very profound way. A boy who is 3 or 5 looks very different than a boy who's 16 or 18, and so the disease process looks different. This is also further changed over time. If you were diagnosed in the 1960s or 70s, the disease process and the timing of those changes was faster. In the 80s and 90s, as spinal fusions became more commonly applied and ventilation was offered, the disease was extended into later life. And now with contemporary, much broader acceptance of earlier usage of steroids in particular, but also a whole host of more rigorous stretching programs, maintaining and doing proactive care, and doing that from the time when kids are diagnosed has actually substantially shifted age at which kids lose ambulation, need ventilation support, need cardiac support, etc. So this is actually shifting the enterprise year over year, and we hope to keep pushing that. And that's actually essentially the endeavor of what we want to do within the Certified Duchenne Care Centers. We can look at these data from a 30,000-foot view. So this is data. The upper blue line is from 1985, and 2005 is kind of the lowest purple blue line. And the lifespan has definitely improved over this 20 years, and you can measure it from CDC data across the US. So we're seeing an impact. You can see it in multiple different ways. I'm going to show you a little movie. This is of Dylan. I'll just get it playing. And I'm going to talk over a little bit. So this is my son. Run, Dylan! Oh, that's me. Sorry. So this is some home movies. And this is Dylan at 3. So this is actually just a couple months after diagnosis. I think as many of you... Good job.
I want to see that. Can you take my shorts off?
I can do it, babe.
Okay, because I'm going to lose
He's so excited, you can hardly remember what he's doing. All right. Okay.
I'm being back. What is it be? I'm going to be Batman. I didn't know every single word.
He's ambitious.
Then
you're going to save the world?
Yeah.
Great job.
For me? How high can you jump off the ground? Nice. Now, I want you to run for me. Run from where you are over to the fence. Ready, set, go. So you can see as Dylan runs at the age of 6, he's actually able to run pretty well and get to the fence pretty easily. He could move around very comfortably. He was able to dance for a few years. That does not come from me. That's a little view of Dylan's personality, which meet him. He's participated in many clinical trials. This is at the age of 10, as he's participating in one of the earlier trials in Southern California.
1, 2, 3, go!
And one of the things we commonly do in clinic is ask kids to rise from the floor, and this is timed Gower is what we call it, and Dylan's going to manifest the very commonly observed Gower sign, which is using his hand to come up, and he's using that now at the age. You'll see in the background as well, this is him running now at the age of 11, and he's modifying how he runs because he's getting progressively weak.
And then when I say go, I want you to try to get up, okay? Just do what you can, okay?
Okay.
Ready?
As much as I can?
As much as you can.
Okay.
Ready, set, go.
And this is the next year. Kong doesn't help him very much.
Not exactly sure.
Yeah, I know. So just do what you can.
I think I can just do this.
Okay. On your mark, get set, go.
This is at that same
Good, good, go, Dylan, go, 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 go. All the way to the end. Go, 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 go. And stop.
And just a few months after that, he transitioned to needing a full-time wheelchair, which is the one that he's demonstrating there in our clinical trial center. But he's, one of the things that I love about Dylan, and love about a lot of the kids, is Duchenne does not completely define their lives. You'll see throughout this, here he is with Jennifer Lawrence doing a video shoot to prank Smosh, These are YouTube guys who I hadn't heard of before Dylan told me about them. But this has been seen by over 10 million people. He did a Make-A-Wish with Dude Perfect, and that's been seen by over 10 million people as well. So he's a little YouTube celebrity. When we were in Alaska on a trip, a young girl recognized him. The disease keeps progressing, and this is Dylan's course. Not every child's course.
People feel so sad for me that I'm in a wheelchair. Trust me, it's a lot harder without it.
That's his attitude. So that's Dylan in a nutshell. So he's a great kid, obviously. And the kids all have this amazing spirit. They're growing up with this difficulty. The reason I like to show that video, and I show it to medical students and actually colleagues, partly is that we always see kids in a static flavor. So often our residents or our fellows are seeing a child at an instant, and they don't see the child before, they don't see the child after oftentimes. And I think it's really important to kind of see that holistic approach and really understand where kids came from and when they're going to as we offer this sort of care. Keep in mind that is one slice of how kids get through this disease process. There's lots of differences in how the kids actually proceed through sort of a natural Duchenne disease course. This is caused somewhat by different DMD mutations. This is plotting each black dot. Each line is a different mutation category, and each black dot is the age at which a given child lost the ability to walk independently. And we can see there's actually some children, I don't know if I can advance the slides over here, who are still walking at very advanced stages, and others who lost the ability to walk in early childhood. This spectrum of variation exists. We don't understand it fully yet, but we're working to try to unravel that. Some of it is based on the exact DMD gene mutation, of course, and that can have a substantial impact. Those who have, for instance, a 3 to 7 deletion skippable by exon 8 are often still walking late into their teenage years, and that's quite different than somebody who might have a mutation that's skippable by exon 51, the target of exon dys 51. So we need that information. We also still need data on muscle biopsies. We tend not to do muscle biopsies much anymore, but muscle biopsies provide sometimes critical and essential information. These are actually 3 different boys with different severity of diseases. This is a boy who's actually ending up having a Becker disease type presentation, or course, he had a Duchenne presentation. He has a lot of revertant fibers, these fibers here, which have some dystrophin, much more than what I would predict Dylan would have. This boy has a fairly large amount of dystrophin and actually less severe disease phenotype on his muscle biopsy. And this young man wasn't diagnosed until age 26 and has a larger amount of dystrophin. All of these people have a dystrophinopathy or a Duchenne-like process. They'll have progressive muscle weakness, all have a serious disease, but oftentimes we will ask for muscle biopsies along the way, and I think it's important to keep gathering that information in special circumstances. There's also the possibility that other gene mutations or other genes are involved in modifying how the disease progresses through childhood and into adulthood. So this is one of the more famous ones. It's called LTBP4 is the gene's name. And this is a finding from mouse studies from Beth McNally here in Chicago. And from this finding, Kevin Flanagan and a group of people at the United Dystrophinopathy Project were able to see a common variation in humans that also appears to have an effect on the age at which kids lose ambulation. So specific variants in LTBP4 predict a more slow disease progression. There's other new data coming out all the time. This is one paper in one family from Dr. Bizzoni, and indicating that a specific splicing factor, when it was different, shifted and actually did some increased natural skipping in this one patient. These are interesting findings. We're searching and doing a parent project funded study, and we're seeking 1,000 different samples for genetic modifiers to search for those individuals that are having a very severe disease course and a very mild disease course. These data, when put together, can actually help fill out what this full spectrum of how other genes are mutated can impact the Duchenne disease course. What's staggering to me as a geneticist is we can now sequence the entire 3 billion base genome for about $1,000 per person in a few days. So this is now possible to even further ramp up how one goes about doing this. If people are interested in this, please go by the poster session and you can give your contact information to Emily Deween, and I think that's, you can decide whether you'd like to participate in that with a blood sample or saliva sample. The data at the end of the day, I was talking to somebody as I was out in the hallway, if we look at any two people in this room, unless you're closely related, there's 5 million DNA differences between us. So searching through that needle in a haystack to find the one variation or the small number of variations that are greatly impacting Duchenne is difficult. And that's why we need so many people to participate in these sorts of studies to ferret out which exact DNA changes are impacting the disease course. It's critical that we collect that data about how the boys are behaving in their disease course. We also need to keep gathering data about why patients are different that might be from the environment. So Duchenne Connect is a phenomenal tool for this, as well as the certified Duchenne care centers. So people make different treatment choices. You will all go through and look at different options, steroid dosing options, steroid choice options, different supplements, etc. If we can collect that data, we can start to mine it and learn from that. You know, a simple example would be prednisone versus deflazacort, which is something that people have been wrestling with for 20 years or so. And corticosteroids, exactly when we should start, when we should stop. Emflaza is now specifically approved for Duchenne muscular dystrophy, but needs insurance approval. These all add sort of variations in terms of how people practice medicine or choices that parents will make. So when we take this, we can take this as a negative. You can also take it as a positive, that with this variation in what people do, you can actually start to look at what these different regimens and how they behave are doing. So there's 28 different steroid regimens in this one paper by Birch-Griggs that physicians across Europe and the US actually have implemented and are treating their patients with. That's a little crazy, right? And there's really 2 studies that are done. There's a few different comparison studies. But physicians are creative like everybody else, and they'll keep exploring these. It gives the opportunity to ask if somebody happened to hit on a really brilliant regimen and multiple people were using it and it was rising to the surface, if you collected that data, you'd actually know it. Prednisone was identified to be a substantial modifier of the disease phenotype. The first study was done in 1974. A New England Journal of Medicine paper published by Jerry Mendel was not performed until 1989 with a randomized placebo-controlled trial testing 2 different doses in 6-month trial. And that study was significant. It's published in the New England Journal of Medicine. And those data are missing some things, though. It's not long-term. We don't know what the effect is long-term. So can you look at these sorts of data? It also didn't address whether deflazacort was superior or inferior. Didn't even test that. Here's an example of how Duchenne Connect can be useful to us as a community. So this is from a few years ago. So we took all the Duchenne Connect data that was available, all the mutation information. We'd asked people what steroid regimen they were on. Were they on daily dose steroids? Have they never been on steroids? And the plot on the left is steroid versus no steroid, and red is shifted to the right, which means boys were walking to a higher age, and no steroid was off to the left. So steroids are clearly working, and the data that people reported was useful. What was interesting about this is we could also break it up. So this is actually still the world's largest trial of deflazacort versus prednisone. It's just collected retrospectively. But we had 404 patients having received deflazacort in this retrospective study from looking at Duchenne Connect, and 286 on prednisone, and 98, I can't read my own writing, having never had steroids. The black line furthest to the right is deflazacort, which is performing substantially better than prednisone alone or no steroid at all. This is purely from self-reported parent data collected on Duchenne Connect, nothing else. And this is now consistent with a growing body of other data. I think we want to be able to keep turning this crank with better resolution. Do we want to know what age these boys started steroids? Are there variations in exactly how they were giving the steroid? You can start asking other questions of this. Heart medicines, if we start giving heart medicines early, does it really make an impact? We can learn that over the years. Or if you're giving different supplements, which are not medical supplements, do they have an impact on the disease process? We can control for the multivariate nature of these sorts of data sets, because some people might take for instance, coenzyme Q, but not vitamin D, and take prednisone. Other people take deflazacort and creatine, but nothing else, right? So lots of combinations in this. And there's statistical ways to do multivariate analysis to remove some of the interacting terms. And what was surprising from this data is vitamin D usage was positively correlated with a higher age at loss of ambulation. It's a bit of a surprising finding. We still don't understand why that is there. Coenzyme Q10 usage is also associated with a higher age at loss of ambulation. There's a number of other factors which people are doing and reporting in Duchenne Connect, which are trending towards having a positive effect, but are not statistically significant simply because there's not quite enough data. We'll look at these data again over time, and we'll look to see how robust some of these are. As Kathy mentioned, the CDC guidelines are a consensus document amongst over 80 different care providers, which were published several years ago, and we all hope to implement in our own clinical environments, and they're written out in these 2 Lancet Neurology papers, which are great things to have. And they've led to the Certified Duchenne Care Center program. The idea of this program and what should happen is we should get better at diagnosing, we should get better at recognizing the disease earlier, doing the genetic testing, giving people better informed decisions about treatment modifications that we might do in order to improve quality and duration of life for all of the boys. We also want to make these environments a place where the community becomes more knowledgeable over time, and that will feed into how do we better inform ourselves about clinical trial participation. And I think what's very important from what Kathy had said was we want everybody to have a similar standard of care so that there's less variation heading into clinical trials. That's actually going to be critically important for getting answers out quicker. The other part that I'd really like to see is for us in the CDCC program to create a self-learning environment. That is, all the clinical data that we collect across the many centers really ought to come and pump us back with information to improve our care in a fairly short timeline. Actually, just already said all those. I'm going to scooch on. I'll also mention that Duchenne Connect Data can be useful retrospectively. This is an analysis that Richard Wang did, who's in my lab, from Duchenne Connect Data. And this is looking at age at loss of ambulation. The red line are the 12 Sarepta boys in the phase 2 clinical trial, resulted in them getting the first approval for a Duchenne drug last September. There was an active debate in this about were the external controls typical of Duchenne, or were the 12 boys that were on the Sarepta drug typical of Duchenne. So the external control group that was used by Sarepta is the green line, and black are the steroid-treated boys matching the exact entry criteria of the study in the black line, matching the external control well. So you can use these data as well to say, really what is the natural history like in this disease process. So that's sort of an example. That was actually not a placebo-controlled trial, and it ended up getting approved. And I think it creates this issue of, can we get away without doing placebo-controlled trials? There's a upside to that, and there's a risk as well. In many instances, placebo controls become the simplest way to ask a clinical question, and that's why it'll be used. That's why it'll be accepted by companies. It's why the FDA will accept it more easily. It's just intellectually easier to do. Sometimes it's ethically not quite the right place to be, and we'll be having this discussion in an ongoing way. But because it removes rater bias, because it can remove the placebo effect or account for it, it allows potentially a much faster clinical trial to be done. So I think there's some things of that sort. What we want to focus on is making sure that as our kids move into these clinical trials, there's minimum variation to allow the clinical trials to move forward. With that, I'm just going to thank you with a couple of pictures for the research side, clinical side of what we do at UCLA. Thank you so much.